How's it going, guys? My name is Graeme and welcome to Walk Sim. This is a walking simulator game that's actually made to address the debate of walking simulator games, whether or not they should truly be considered games. I think it's meant to cover kind of the history of those types of games and just provide a little more information to help people make their judgments on whether or not they should be considered games. Thank you to Alpha Beta Gamer for sharing it with me. This is something that I think could be a really cool discussion. So you can see it's giving examples here like Firewatch, the Stanley Parable. Unfortunately, I don't know that one. And I don't know this one. I personally am on the side of things that games are a very effective medium of storytelling, and that it doesn't matter if the core mechanic to a game is walking. If you still feel like you get something out of the game, then I think it should still be considered a game. In walking simulators, you rifle through bits of life in all these games to answer crucial questions. In the process, the exploration becomes a kind of alchemy, turning the most basic forms of interaction and living into golden discovery. From Catherine Cross. So if you firmly believe that video games require action, running, gunning, jumping, shooting, all that stuff, then hopefully this gives you a little bit of a perspective from the other side of things, and maybe give you a deeper appreciation of the design of walking games. I'm hoping to get a little something out of it. Hopefully you guys do too. Environment of a walk. One of the most crucial elements of a walking simulator is its environment. Without a certain touch, careful thought, the facade falls away. Although this can be the intention, it can come across as lazy when a game is largely built around very simple mechanics. A common staple of walking simulators is outdoor environments, where an organic layout can obscure the seams and further immerse the player. A walk through time. This could be really interesting. A trip through a brief and incomplete history of the walking simulator. Dear Esther, or Ether, I've never known how I'm supposed to say it. Back in 2008, a game I believe I have but have never played, but that's the earliest instance I remember where people started freaking out like, this isn't a game, it's literally just a walking simulator. You're just walking through things and little events unfold. It's more a movie than a game, etc., etc. I've never played it, but I remember it being a big deal and winning a bunch of awards and stuff. I always meant to try it. Jumping quite a bit ahead here to the Stanley Parable, the pre-release. And that was the pre-release, like these are the original mods or betas that led to the full games. So there's the full release of Dear Ether in 2012. The full release of Stanley Parable was here just before 2014. In between there was Proteus, Eidolon, and Gone Home. I've never heard of those two, but Gone Home was another big deal. And I don't remember, I think a lot of people cut the Stanley Parable some slack because it had so much branching storyline options. The narration was so well put together and everything. I know it wasn't everyone's, cup of tea, but I think people cut that game a lot of slack. I think Gone Home was similarly railed to the way Dear Esther was. The Beginner's Guide, that's very recent. I've been meaning to try that one. Dr. Langeskov, The Tiger and the Terribly Cursed Emerald, a whirlwind heist, made by the same team who did the Stanley Parable. Firewatch, Everyone's Gone to Rapture, and Virginia. So these must be like the largest releases of walking simulators. There's definitely more than these ones that they're showing off. But that's interesting. I would have expected this timeline to have started further back. Maybe there would be some really linear, simple like 2D game or something that had released a long time ago, but maybe it's a much more recent phenomenon that I realized, to just have the core point of a game to be storytelling. Walk and talk. Perhaps the largest factor of any walking simulator is its story and how it tells it. Some will tell them quietly using the environment, others supplementing a voiceover or using actual characters. Some may even forego any spoken narrative, relying purely on body language and expressions. Walking exemplars. You can see a selection of walking simulators that have made some of the biggest splashes in the digital game scene. These are only a few of many walking simulators out there. Despite being a niche genre for a niche audience, it's found itself a substantial and unique foundation. So I guess similar to the timeline there, this is just focusing on like the big ones. Is there anything on here that wasn't? All of these are in the timeline there. So it's the same lineup of games. Walk Sim? One of the strongest points of contention in the walking simulator genre is simply its name. It began as a derogatory term that was quickly co-opted. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought, especially like back when Dear Ether was coming out. I remember people saying like, what, it's just a stupid walking simulator, like this game doesn't have anything to offer, there's no replay value, or, you know, people just couldn't get into it. But I kind of like that they've turned it into something more positive, and it's a good way to know what you're getting out of a game. So if you see walking simulator as a label, you don't instantly have to assume that that means bad, but you can really quickly know whether or not that game's for you, depending on if you like that style of game. Some still feel it doesn't suit it, however. Some other names have been suggested. Oh, this is interesting. You could just call it a drama, an exploration game. Although when they're really linear, it's less of an exploration, right? I feel like it should be like it should be like a novel game, or like a video novel, or a playable novel, or something along those lines. Maybe thrillers, narrative games. That's interactive narrative. That's kind of the sort of terms I was searching for just now. Interactive narrative experience. I like that one too. Empathy games. That's interesting. It depends how much you're supposed to embody the character. Like if you are supposed to become Stanley in the game, or if it's a game where you are putting yourself in the position of the main character. So that one doesn't always fit. Explory thing. That always kind of... There you go. That's pretty broad enough. That covers a lot of them. Computer dream or movement zone. I don't like those ones very much. I like the narrative-based explanations. Empathy games could fit some of them. Drama and thriller kind of fit in other things there. So I think these narrative ones are my favorite descriptor of them. But I think walking simulator is a term that I like. I think it works well. It communicates a lot, and it helps people decide whether or not they feel they can get into the game.
Hey, so you just got to the stairs, which means you've got an idea of what a walking simulator is. Or I hope you do if you're here already.
I didn't expect this to have narration.
Like what you're doing right now. And I think it's important to establish what something is before you speak at length about it. For clarity.
Hey, look at this. We get a little video. Oh no, this is just a doorway. I wasn't expecting there to be a narrator in this game, which is a very common thing in these sorts of games. So that's really awesome that they included that.
Here you can see the immediate reactions to these games. Essentially the user reviews. This isn't to say that people can't take their time and be thoughtful and critical of their evaluation. However, more often than not, it's a quick, visceral takeaway from the game.
So things like Firewatch, Beginner's Guide, Stanley Parable, The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, Jazz Punk, those ranked pretty highly on the user reviews. But with those few exceptions, everything else is sitting right around like that 40-50 zone. I'm not sure what the numbers on the side here are saying, but not a game, not an experience, not really a walking simulator either. Hard to categorize this title, but one thing is for sure, it's awkward. Oh, these are the scores people gave, and then the accompanying review. Avoid at all costs if you actually want a game. This is nothing even slightly resembling a game. This game works like this. You are in a scene, you walk a bit, click, game jumps to the next scene. This game is all hype, no ghosts. Lamest game ever, literally. As someone who honestly enjoys a good playable story, this hits relatively high. The gameplay is smooth, the sound is smooth, everything regarding the game is smooth. Unfortunately, the game is quite short, and on top of that, the story is a bit lacking at points. So that's a pretty legitimate review. This guy doesn't hate the genre of game, and he acknowledges that the game was well made and handles well. He just wasn't a fan of the story. That's a very legitimate review. It's good getting a nice range of these guys who just hated it instantly, a guy who doesn't think it counts as a game, and then someone who gave it a very fair review, I'd say. 20 for Stanley Parable. I really like that game, so that's shocking. And this review is going down onto the floor there. Stanley Parable was a pretty funny experience with some well thought out quips on narrative and game structure. However, I don't think you can really call these kind of interactive 3D audio-visual experiences games, though. In a game, you have to be able to win or lose. And I would argue that you can win or lose a Stanley Parable. It's particularly vexing to hear him call something Counter-Strike maps, games, damn, it cuts off. So this guy doesn't like it, but he had a rational argument behind it, a very valid opinion, I'd say. Hey, this is just like the Stanley Parable, where you can go into the credits room and see the layout of everything. And so I think right now, I'm seeing the layout of that first first room that we were in.
Critics, on the other hand, are far more receptive of these games, often acclaiming them in their eloquence or execution. To some degree, it's the indie factor, a small group of people doing something different in the landscape of digital games. Past that, they often are simply good games, just not games as games are understood by a larger audience.
So the floor here is just 62, but a lot of things are pushing up into like an 80 and 90 range, which is really strong. I can't read the top very well. The beauty of Dear Esther, the game is recommended for anyone who likes taking a close look at a piece of art that goes against the grain of the medium. You should consider checking out Dear Esther the same way you'd appraise a film. If you're interested in absorbing an intellectual story and gorgeous visuals without having to exert a drop of effort, take a chance on this curious experiment. It kind of makes sense that there'd be critics who probably are used to looking at movies and TV and games and all sorts of like audio-visual mediums, that they would be more receptive of this stuff, whereas the user category is people who could be playing anything from Firewatch to Call of Duty, you know? And so, depending on what your favorite genre of game is, you're going to review games probably more relative to that, whereas these critics could be reviewing them relative to other media. If you're into the idea of experimental games pushing the boundaries of the medium, and games in quote, he's not directly saying this is a game, but he's kind of is, kind of isn't. You might like Dear Esther, but if you're looking for a detailed story of event A causing event B, which then naturally leads to event C, then this is not for you. Oh, so he's criticizing the story there. This unconventional game combines strong story, beautiful natural surroundings, and fantastically written and played characters. What it lacks in classic adventure mechanics, it makes up in great dialogue system between the main protagonists. It's gripping, compelling stories set in a truly beautiful world that's worth exploring. Just go in with your expectations clear. This is a relatively short game that's almost entirely about the story, which consists almost entirely of two people talking over radios to one another. So this is Firewatch. You play a chubby guy in his 40s talking to presumably a woman of a similar age who you never see. There's really nothing else like it I can think of, and it trails off something. It's rewarding. I believe they're talking about Firewatch there. So let's see what next thing they want to address about the genre. Hey, get to head outside. Wrap our way around.
Games that are good games, but not games as games are known by most who play games. It's kind of a terrible descriptor to call anything digital and interactive a game, isn't it?
That was less of a clear statement than some of the other positions you've been taking earlier there, narrator. Am I just walking in circles here? I am moving higher, right? I'm not sure. I might be in some kind of small little loop now. No, I'm actually moving up further in things.
In these games, you have fairly minimal control. Even right now, at best, you're moving and looking at the same time and hitting these invisible triggers for dialogue. This degree of minimalism isn't a problem. The problem is the idea that because it's minimal, that there's something missing. Minimalism doesn't take away from something, it enhances what's already there.
I would agree with that pretty strongly. There's minimalistic games that everyone would consider a game that involve like two buttons. It can be as simple as a jump and a shoot, like a run and gun. In that instance, you're not even in control of your own movement. You're only handling or manning two different actions. So in that sense, walking and looking around involves as much gameplay as those games. I understand the bridge there of it being more action and unpredictable and reactive.
In a lot of ways, the reasons walk sims work as well as they do is because it's about the journey, not the destination.
Absolutely, I would agree with that one. Part of me is tempted to just see if you can just like run off the edge of this and just see what they included in this little demo presentation that they've put together. This is weird, because now I've been making the argument that walking simulators are games, and here I am playing Walk Sim, and I would argue that this isn't a game. There's no story here that I'm progressing through, no character arcs, nothing to really interact with, just a narrator. The Stanley Parable, you walk around, there's a narrator, there's a clear story, there's development, you learn things about the character, about the setting, the environment. I would call that a game. I would call this a well thought out, interesting, interactive presentation, which now I'm arguing against myself here. I feel like I'm obscuring what I've been defending up until now. But I can't think of any other walking simulator, like quote walking simulator, quote game, however you want to define or classify them, where I felt like I wasn't immersed and playing a game. This is kind of an exception to the rule. They were kind of going for something a little bit different, a little more specific here. Hey, have I reached the top of all of this now? Perhaps the final doorway to enter. And I thought this whole thing was going to take place in that museum.
From how people have responded to them, it says a lot. They either aren't video games, or they're so far at the edges of what a game can be, pushing those definitions. Then, of course, what is a video game? At the beginning of this, I vaguely defined what a walking simulator was, but not a video game. Which, for all intents and purposes, is what a walking simulator is. And that's just another problem in the larger landscape of games. Because of the age of video games, we don't have proper descriptors for a lot of the nuances of this media. Space Invaders and World of Warcraft are both video games, but anyone can tell you that they're vastly different from each other.
That's an interesting comparison, actually.
They do exist at the already blurred edges of digital games. They're the products of people pushing and exploring narrative systems in an admittedly limited scope of interaction. Like most indie games, they're pushing the boundaries that most AAA platforms can't or won't. They offer a degree of authenticity in the realm of digital games, one that's often lacking. Small teams or one-person developers putting their all into a game, creating something new and interesting at the cusp of a constantly evolving media.
I like the comparison of something like Pong to World of Warcraft. That really does give you a sense of how wide the scope is of video games as a whole, but at the same time, a collection of limericks packaged and sold versus the Lord of the Rings trilogy could both be considered books or novels or stories. I don't think we need to be subdividing things further than video games. They just are video games. And then you can start getting into genres of it the same way you would get into a love or romance versus drama or murder mystery or anything for a novel. Then you can start bringing down genres of games. I think all of them can just be classified as games, though. But I think the point he was making is just to appreciate the scope of what is already considered a game, and why couldn't we just lump in walking simulators with that? People might say, well, maybe it's closer to a movie or a TV show or like an audiobook or something, but you don't interact with any of those. That's something unique to video games.
It doesn't matter if you understand it, or it doesn't matter if you get it. It's not a problem to be solved. It's just a thing to be in for a while.
And see, I like that description, and I appreciate the argument of I don't get it. If you don't get it, then hey, it's not for you. Maybe you don't pick up walking simulators in the future, you don't play more of them, but it doesn't mean it wasn't a video game. If I told you that if I said I don't like the Final Fantasy series, it doesn't suddenly become not a game, you know? But the beach is actually the final part of this game, a very lovely beach, a nice little beach. I'm very curious to hear what you guys have to say. I spent a little bit more time on this than I was expecting, but I think it could generate a really interesting discussion. I want to hear from you guys. I want to know what walking simulators do you like? I want to know, do you like walking simulators? If you do, which ones do you like? If you don't, then what are some of the main reasons you dislike them? And then, no matter what side of the fence you're on, whether you like or dislike them, I want to know whether or not you consider them a game. So I did my best to share as much of my thoughts on the subject as I could. I'm really looking forward to this being like a cool open discussion with everyone. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say about it. Thank you guys all so much for watching and listening, and I hope to see you again soon.